Imagine this. You're scrolling through Tinder and a match catches your eye. He's handsome, well-dressed, and his profile is filled with images of a luxurious lifestyle. Private jets, high-end hotels, designer suits. Intrigued, you swipe right, and to your surprise, he matches back. He's charming, attentive, and soon sweeps you into a whirlwind romance that feels something out of a dream. But as time passes, the story takes a dark turn. The man you trusted, the person you believed was your soulmate, begins asking for help, claiming he's in danger, that his life is on the line. And in a haze of worry, love, and loyalty, you agree to help him, only to discover too late that everything he told you was a lie. What drives someone to manipulate others on such a profound level, seemingly without guilt or remorse? Let's unpack this. This is the story of the Tinder Swindler, one of the most elaborate romance scams in recent years. In today's episode of Let's Unpack This, we'll dive into the psychology behind Simon Leviev's deception. We'll break down how he built his complex facade, the tactics he used to control his victims, and the devastating impact of his betrayal. And as we go along, we'll keep our question in mind. What drives someone to manipulate others on such a profound level, seemingly without guilt or remorse? So grab a seat, and let's get to the bottom of this psychological puzzle. To understand the full impact of the Tinder Swindler, we need to look at how Simon Leviev built an entire life around deception. Simon, whose real name is Shimon Hayut, posed as the son of a wealthy diamond mogul. He crafted a meticulous online persona, filled with images of luxury, private jets, designer clothes, exotic locations, and high-end hotels. His social media presence was designed to exude wealth, power, and exclusivity, setting the stage for a story that would captivate his victims. Using Tinder as his primary platform, Simon would match with women and quickly sweep them off their feet. He was attentive, romantic, and by all appearances deeply invested in building a genuine relationship. He would arrange elaborate first dates, flying his matches to meet him in different cities, treating them to fine dining and exclusive experiences. These dates were more than just romantic gestures. They were part of a calculated strategy to gain his victims' trust and make them believe they were entering a new world. But beneath the glamorous exterior was a web of lies. Simon would eventually claim that he was in grave danger, that powerful enemies were after him due to his family's involvement in the diamond industry. He tells victims he couldn't access his own funds for safety reasons, and that he needed their help. Framing his requests as urgent life or death situations, he would ask them to send money, often urging them to take out loans or open new lines of credit to protect him. The cycle of romance, crisis, and financial dependency became Simon's formula. Each victim would unwittingly fund his luxurious lifestyle, while Simon moved on to new targets, using the money from one woman to create the illusion of wealth for the next. In essence, he created a chain of deception, where each woman's trust and financial security were sacrificed for his own gain. The scale of Simon's scam wasn't just about the money. It was about control, manipulation, and the psychological devastation left in his wake. His victims were left with crippling debt and shattered trust, forced to rebuild their lives after discovering the man they loved was a master con artist. Simon Leviev's story is not just about financial loss. It's about the emotional destruction that comes when someone you trust uses their own compassion against you. Simon Leviev didn't just rely on a false identity to deceive his victims. He used a complex blend of psychological tactics to build trust, create dependency, and ultimately control his targets. Let's explore how charm and deception became his tools of choice. One of Simon's primary tactics was love bombing. In the early stages of a relationship, he would overwhelm his victims with grand gestures of affection, extravagant dates, lavish gifts, and constant messages. Love bombing is a manipulation technique where the perpetrator showers their target with excessive attention and admiration, creating a rapid and intense emotional connection. This tactic is powerful because it makes the target feel cherished and deeply valued, breaking down their natural defenses. For Simon's victims, the love bombing phase felt genuine, creating a sense of security that made them less likely to question his intentions later. As he built this foundation of trust, Simon would present himself as a man of authority, someone powerful and respected. He didn't just claim to be wealthy, he he created an entire persona around his supposed family legacy in the diamond industry. He'd show off branded credit cards, hired bodyguards, and pose in luxury settings. This level of detail taps into a psychological bias we all have, the tendency to trust people who appear authoritative or influential. By presenting himself as someone important, Simon was able to bypass skepticism and establish credibility. His victims weren't just in awe of him, they believed him to be beyond reproach, someone who couldn't possibly have ulterior motives. Once he had secured this trust, Simon introduced a new tactic: gaslighting. After weeks or months of romantic gestures, he would claim that he was in grave danger, that powerful enemies were out to get him. He'd frame his request for money as urgent and necessary for his survival. Gaslighting is a psychological technique where the manipulator distorts reality to make the victim question their own judgment. Simon twisted the narrative to make his victims feel responsible for his safety, playing on their emotions to ensure they complied. If they hesitated, he'd subtly imply that they didn't care enough, using guilt to push them into helping him financially. This combination of love bombing, authority, and gaslighting created a powerful cycle of dependency. Simon's victims felt emotionally invested, responsible, and ultimately trapped. Each of these techniques worked in tandem, reinforcing the other tactics and keeping his victims committed, even when doubts began to arise. By the time they realized something was wrong, they were already in too deep, often financially entangled and emotionally drained. Simon's methods reveal a chilling understanding of how to exploit trust and compassion, turning love and loyalty into tools of control. For Simon Leviev, the end goal wasn't just emotional control, it was financial exploitation. He didn't simply ask his victims for money. He pushed them to take out loans, open new lines of credit, and stretch their finances to a breaking point, all under the guise of protecting his life. This isn't just manipulation. It's a textbook case of financial abuse. Financial abuse occurs when someone exploits another person's financial resources for their own benefit, leaving the victim financially vulnerable and often dependent on the abuser. Simon's tactics took this abuse to an extreme. His victims weren't just lending him small amounts, they were taking on tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, often maxing out credit cards or borrowing from family and friends. Simon's emotional manipulation made them feel like these financial sacrifices were not only justified but necessary. He created a false sense of urgency, convincing them that without their help, he was at risk. The impact of financial abuse goes far beyond the immediate loss of money. For Simon's victims, the aftermath was devastating. Many were left with crippling debt, and because they were the ones who had taken out the loans or maxed out the cards, they were legally responsible for paying it back. This debt didn't just affect their bank accounts, it impacted their credit scores, limited their financial futures, and even affected their career choices. In some cases, it would take years to recover financially, forcing them to rebuild their lives from scratch. But the financial consequences were only one part of the trauma. Financial abuse is often accompanied by intense feelings of shame and guilt. Victims might blame themselves, wondering how they allowed themselves to be manipulated into such a vulnerable position. Society often overlooks financial abuse, viewing it as less harmful than physical or emotional abuse, but the psychological toll can be just as severe. For Simon's victims, the combination of betrayal and financial strain created a deep sense of isolation. Many were reluctant to share their stories, fearing judgment or ridicule, which only compounded their feelings of shame. Financial abuse is an especially insidious form of control because it's hard to escape from. For Simon's victims, even after discovering the truth, they were left to carry the financial burdens he created. The debt tied them to the traumatic experience, serving as a constant reminder of the betrayal they endured. Simon's actions show how far some individuals are willing to go, not just to deceive, but to completely drain their victims, financially and emotionally, for their own benefit. Simon Leviev's scam was more than just deception. It was an intricately crafted fantasy. By creating a world filled with wealth, danger, and exclusivity, he invited them into a carefully constructed illusion. For Simon, the deception was not only about financial gain, but crafting a life that allowed him to escape from the ordinary and immerse himself and his victims in an intoxicating fantasy. One of the most powerful psychological drivers of Simon's success was escapism. Escapism is the act of avoiding reality by engaging in fantasy or daydreams, often to create a sense of fulfillment or excitement that's missing in real life. For Simon, this fantasy of being a wealthy heir with enemies and a life filled with luxury was likely a form of escape from his own reality. He was able to step into this powerful, glamorous persona and live a life free from the limitations that might have otherwise defined him. For his victims, Simon's fantasy world was equally enticing. The private jets, five-star hotels, and glamorous dinners created an experience that felt extraordinary, like something out of a movie or fairy tale. By sharing this lifestyle with them, Simon allowed his victims to escape their everyday lives and feel as though they were part of something rare and elite. The sense of exclusivity and adventure made it harder for them to see the truth behind the facade. They didn't just fall in love with Simon, they fell in love with the world he created. But this escape into fantasy also served another purpose. By creating a world so different from reality, Simon made it nearly impossible for his victims to question him. The sheer contrast between their lives before Simon and the experiences he offered created a sense of dependency. They didn't want to lose the excitement and thrill that came with dating someone so important. And because the fantasy was so appealing, it clouded their ability to recognize inconsistencies or red flags. The escapism became a trap. Furthermore, this fantasy provided Simon with a sense of control and fulfillment that may have been missing in his own life. Psychological studies suggest that individuals who engage in extreme deception often become attached to the roles they create, to the point where they begin to view their fabricated persona as a real part of themselves. For Simon, the line between fantasy and reality may have been blurred, leading him to become so absorbed in the role of Simon Leviev that he was able to ignore or rationalize the harm he caused. In Simon's case, it may be that the fantasy he created became more important to him than the lives he damaged. By fully immersing himself in this new alternate reality, he could avoid facing the ethical consequences of his actions, allowing him to continue his deception without remorse. The story of the Tinder Swindler isn't just about Simon Leviev's deception, it's about the lasting scars left on his victims. For each woman he manipulated, the fallout went far beyond financial ruin. They were left with profound psychological wounds, betrayal, trauma, and a shattered ability to trust. One of the most devastating aspects of Simon's con was the betrayal itself. Imagine trusting that someone you loved and trusted wasn't who they claimed to be, that your memories, emotions, and even your future plans were all based on lies. This type of betrayal leads to something psychologists refer to as betrayal trauma. Betrayal trauma occurs when someone we deeply trust violates that trust, creating a profound psychological impact. In this case, Simon's victims weren't just deceived, they were betrayed in a way that cut to the core of their sense of security and self-worth. This type of trauma is uniquely damaging because it's not just about the lies. It's about realizing that everything you believed was real was actually an illusion. For many of Simon's victims, this betrayal led to a crisis of identity. They began to question their own judgment, wondering how they could have been deceived so thoroughly. This self-doubt is common among victims of manipulation, as they replay events in their minds, searching for missed red flags. The experience often leaves them feeling isolated and ashamed, questioning not only their relationships, but their own ability to trust their instincts. In cases of prolonged deception like this, victims often struggle with self-esteem issues and a sense of disorientation as they try to reconcile the memories with the painful truth. The psychological toll didn't stop there. Many of Simon's victims exhibited symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, including flashbacks, anxiety, and depression. PTSD is common among people who experience betrayal trauma, especially when the betrayal is prolonged and involves intense emotional investment. For these women, the person they loved and trusted used their vulnerability against them, leaving them to grapple with the emotional fallout alone. PTSD symptoms can include nightmares, feelings of detachment, and difficulty moving on from the trauma, which can affect every aspect of a person's life, from relationships to careers, and even personal identity. Another lasting impact of Simon's deception was the destruction of trust. For victims of this kind of manipulation, trusting others becomes incredibly difficult. Relationships, especially romantic ones, are built on vulnerability and openness, but after such a profound betrayal, it's hard to let those walls down again. Many victims struggle with trust issues long after the deception is uncovered. finding it hard to believe that others won't hurt them in the same way. Lastly, Simon's victims experience profound isolation. When someone is deceived to this extent, sharing their story can feel impossible. They may fear judgment or ridicule from others who don't understand the emotional depth of their relationship with the manipulator. This isolation compounds the feelings of shame and makes it harder to seek the support they need to recover. It's easy to underestimate the psychological impact of manipulation, but cases like Simon's highlight how damaging prolonged deception can be. Simon's actions didn't just leave his victims financially devastated. They left lasting emotional scars that could take years to heal. His story is a stark reminder of the power of trust and the emotional cost when that trust is shattered. As we come to the end of Simon Leviev's story, we're left with our central question. What drives someone to manipulate others on such a profound level, seemingly without guilt or remorse? Simon's actions suggest a personality driven by traits often associated with narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, an intense need for power, control, and admiration, coupled with the lack of empathy. For someone like Simon, other people can become tools, valued only for what they can provide, whether it's money, attention, or validation. His elaborate scams weren't just about financial gain. They're about creating a fantasy where he was always in control, always admired, and always untouchable. But it's not just about Simon's psychology. It's also about the systems and vulnerabilities that allowed him to thrive. Social media lets people curate perfect, often misleading versions of their lives, and dating apps provide a platform to connect with victims on a deeply personal level. Simon exploited these tools to create an illusion so convincing that his victims were willing to sacrifice their financial stability and emotional well-being for him. This case is also a wake-up call about how society views victims of scams. Too often, the focus is on blaming the victim, asking why they didn't see the red flags or why they gave so much. But the truth is, Simon's victims didn't fail. They trusted someone who went to extraordinary lengths to deceive them. The real failure lies in the lack of legal protections and societal understanding for victims of financial and emotional abuse. So why did Simon do it? Ultimately, it seems his actions were driven by a dangerous mix of entitlement, a need for control, and an ability to rationalize his behavior. In his mind, the ends justified the means, and the damage he caused was irrelevant as long as he got what he wanted. It's a chilling reminder of how far some people will go to satisfy their own needs, no matter the cost to others. The Tinder Swindler is more than just a story about one man's deception. It's a cautionary tale about the power of trust and the dangers of manipulation in the digital age. It's a stark reminder to protect yourself online, to question things that seem too good to be true, and to recognize the red flags of financial and emotional abuse. So, what do you think? Why do people go to such extreme lengths to deceive those closest to them? Let's continue this conversation in the comments below. If this episode of Let's Unpack This has given you new insight into the psychology behind the Tinder Swindler, please like, subscribe, and join us for future episodes where we dive deep into the minds behind real-life and fictional stories. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay vigilant in your digital interactions.